I'm a visual artist, and I primarily work with printmaking techniques. Grew up here in Southern California, in Los Angeles, Gardena area, and studied printmaking at Cal State Long Beach. I later went to Indiana University, where I got my MFA in printmaking. I've continued to be constant in printmaking, making installations and working with some new technologies like laser cutters. And so to be asked to be on the moderator for this panel was really exciting. I'm really curious to hear about what these printmakers have to say about how new technologies have impacted their work. How have artists really pushed the way that traditional printmaking works, and where they see things going in the future, or what they hope to see happen in the future. So glad to see you guys all here. I hope we have a really great conversation. I'm going to give a short introduction for everyone, and then I have a few questions prepared. I'd love to give some time for Q&A too. Yeah, so here we are. I'll start off with Manny Torres. Right here, Manny is the owner and designer for Second Wind Interdisciplinary Design Studio in Highland Park, California, which blends graphic design and architectural design fabrication. Second Wind provides design and laser cutting services aimed at the architectural, interior, and graphic design community. Let's give him a round of applause, Manny. And next to Manny, I have Brandon Gunn, and Brandon Gunn is the education director at the Tamarind Institute of Lithography in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He completed the Tamarind Professional Printer Training Program in 2008, and Brandon has taught printmaking at the Santa Fe Community College, Concordia University in Montreal, Brigham Young University in Idaho, and Indiana University in Bloomington. Brandon is a skilled master printer, programmer, and an educator at heart. Let's give him a round of applause. Great. Then over here we have Francesco Sequeiros. Now, Francesco is the founder, artist, and master printer at El Nopal Press in downtown Los Angeles, which was established in 1990. El Nopal Press is distinguished by its focus on work with artists who explore border issues and complex cultural relationships that exist between Mexico and the United States. His press has produced editions for artists like Judy Baca, John Baldessari, Harry Gamboa Jr., Gronk, John Valadez, Irena Cervantes, among many others. Let's give him a round of applause. All right, then next to Francesco, we have Garrett Metz. Garrett Metz is a printer at Gemini Gel since 2009. Gemini Gel is a renowned Los Angeles print workshop that was established in 1966 and has been a vital and innovative force in fine art printmaking and publishing the work of internationally celebrated artists. He's printed work for Richard Serra, Julie Meritu, Michael Heiser, Ellsworth Kelly, James Rosenquist, David Hammond, John Borowski, Ann Hamilton, Susan Rothenberg, and Joel Shapiro. Let's give him a round of applause. Garrett Metz. And then last but not least, we have Montana Mills. Montana Mills is the studio director for Modern Multiples, a fine art printmaking studio specializing in large-scale serigraphs and high-quality digital prints. Modern Multiples was established in 1999 by LA artist and printmaker Richard Duardo. Rest in peace, exactly. Modern Multiples collaborates with a wide array of contemporary artists and designers to create uniquely highly compatible works of art. Let's give Montana Mills a round of applause. All right, great. So I wanted to start off with some history and talk about printmaking and some things that have been really vital in changing the course of printmaking. I think that in the history of printmaking, we can definitely say the biggest thing in our lifetime has been the digital world coming in and really changing things up. Bringing in computers and how digital work can be combined with different printing process to change the way that we have done printmaking over this year. Also, photography has been really huge, and digital printing to make some of the biggest headways in printmaking so far. Now we're in an age where so many machines are being made that are laser cutting and forming three-dimensional shapes, and these things are starting to come into printmaking too, little by little. So I'm really curious in having a discussion today that really digs into how this has impacted some of the biggest master printers here in Los Angeles and other parts of the United States as well. So my first question, what is the biggest way that you see new technology currently impacting your practice, both in professional printing practice or personal printing practice? And whoever wants to answer that first can go. What's the biggest way you have seen new technology currently impacting your practice?
I guess I have the microphone, so I can start.
Garrett, all right.
I find it funny that I'm even in this talk, considering I print from rocks and metal plates by hand primarily. But I guess when I think of new technology as it relates to printmaking, I think of sort of two different avenues. There's the software side of it, the digital tools to actually make the marks using the computer technology, the programs, and then the digital printing. Can you guys hear me, by the way? No? Okay, so the digital printing side, using Epson printers to print out the film work instead of using traditional darkroom photography is sort of one side of it. And then there's the new technology that actually prints. So there's 3D printing and laser cutting. My experience at Gemini primarily has been adapting traditional technologies to use with the different artists as they see fit. So here's a photo of me using a brayer on a 25 mesh screen to squish a paint stick material that has been ground up through a meat grinder.
So this is pretty cool.
For the artist Richard Serra, and I've been mostly working with Richard Serra for the past 10 years, and mostly we've been developing richer black textures. So the surface texture is the important aspect we're looking for. So at Gemini, we're sort of limited to the technology the artists want us to use. So we do have artists. Leah Saban is one artist we've worked with that she uses a lot of new technology on her private studio practice. So she's done etchings with us.
What's her name?
Her name's Leah Saban. So she's done a lot of laser cut drawings where she'll actually modify her laser cutter with a pen or a Sharpie, and it'll make a single line drawing based on her digital files. And then we take that and coat the copper with a photosensitive emulsion. So that previous file was that.
There we go. That's it right there.
And then that we use in the dark room to process the plates traditionally with a photographic process, and then print the plates.
So it basically functions as something to make the positive out of, to expose. So the machinery now becomes the tool to make the positive.
To actually make the drawing, and then we go and use the traditional printmaking technology to hand print her prints.
Bring it back into the traditional.
So from my aspect, it's dependent on what the artist wants to do, and whether they want to make 3D printed images, then we will do that for them. But in my experience at Gemini, at least, most of the artists are in their 80s and 90s, and it's only the handful of younger artists that are actually implementing newer technology. So.
Yeah. I think that's great. Although I hear you say that you don't think that this is new technology enough, but what I hear you saying is some of the modifications that you're making with this old process are happening by using some of this new technology. So you're changing the old school way of doing things and making it have an element of this new world kind of coming in. So that paint stick, taking a paint stick, putting it through a meat grinder, and trying to print with it over a silk screen, that's something that's very experimental and new. It's not a traditional way of working with this process. And I think that I've seen these prints in person. So the last slide where you can see the texture on one side, there we go. That's him pushing it through, and the texture is so thick. It really gives you a texture and a raised surface that you don't typically get in printmaking. Super rich black, beautiful. So in that way, I think that it does really play with the process of printmaking and bring it into something new.
It's basically a screen door.
Because the mesh is so low.
The 25 mesh screen is.
So thank you, Garrett. I appreciate that. Now, on another hand, I also wanted to reach out to Brandon because we were having this great conversation. He says, he said something similar to what you were saying. He says, I work with the traditional process, and the only reason I work with new technology is because the artist wants to. They're the one that push it on us, really. And so his experience in working with new technology and printmaking, that's the video piece right over there, if you don't mind playing that. He has had some experiences in his life with this, so I'd like to hear what you have to say about it, Brendan.
All right, well, first I have to defer because Marve actually wanted Valtteri Remling, who's our master printer. I'm the education director at Tamarind. You'll get third-hand stories out of me for this because Valtteri printed these. But I will tell you kind of what we've been working with at Tamarind and what we've been dealing with. And again, it goes back to kind of what Garrett said. We work under the constraints of what our artists bring to us. And we bring in a wide variety of artists at Tamarind, all different ages and all different mediums that we're working with. And I find that they're coming in with a different skill set than they used to. So we used to bring in a lot of painters that were strictly painters or sculptors that were strictly sculptors. And now we're bringing in people like Rashad Newsom, who is doing a lot of performance art. And so he actually has, I didn't put in the slide of him, he has dancers that are performing these actions and then recording their movements in a 3D space as they're going around. So they actually have trackers on their body parts that are recording this performance. And so what you're seeing on the left side is this tracking of the motion of this person's hand. I don't know if you can see this. This is a little hand right here at the end of this. And so this piece on the right that was a product of this performance was tracking the hand movements of this dancer in 3D space and then translating that into a two-dimensional space and then into a three-dimensional space too, because this print got, I think it's silver leafed. There was a lot of stuff happening on the pro side in this. There's some silver leafing, printing on the silver leafing, a drop shadow, this little like hand that was printed on the Epson printers and then sheen-collated on there. And then there's one, if you can just see it right here, you probably can't quite tell, but there's a 3D element that also comes out of the print that we farmed out to the 3D printer on campus and then hand painted. So there's this weird mix for us of like technology and the way that our artists are thinking and how we're translating that into the pieces that we're making for them. So we find that our artists are coming in with a lot more varied ideas about how they treat their artwork. And since the next slide's up, I guess I'm going to keep going. So another example of that is Luc Dubois, who we just had in, who is really into data visualization and sound work. And so On the right, you have the final print that's talking about gun violence in the United States and trying to visualize that gun violence. And there was a series of these. And on its own, I'm going to say it's an okay print. Valpyrie's not here. I can say that. Maggie, you can't report that. It's an okay print right now, but there's another side to this print where this is going to go into, I believe AR is coming into play on this. And this is totally Luke. We have nothing to do with AR. We're not coding this or anything like that. But this is him coming in and saying, I want this data to come to life. So I'm going to use the print as a background, and I'm going to put this layer on top of it with alternate reality that then starts to talk about this data. And when he came in for the drawing part of this, because he is so invested in the sound design part of things, a lot of his drawing happened by taking our really crappy photo trays at Tamarind, putting a plate in them, and messing around with sound. So there's a big subwoofer underneath these photo trays that he was using to create sine waves that were cohesive with his ideas to make the designs that went into these prints. So you can see like the toner on the plate kind of bouncing around. I didn't put in the video. He also put marbles in there that were coated with touche and was having them roll around. And this was how he thought about his imagery and the textures that he wanted in his imagery. So the artists are really influencing us. Matt Schlein was another great example of that coming in. And for Matt, on this image on the left side, the right side's something different, and I'll get to that later. But Matt was a very traditional start to this. We just printed a lot of blend rolls on our offset press. We didn't even bother additioning. We just had them shifting in color. He wanted and Matt's colorblind, so I'm not really sure where this came from, but he wanted a shift in the passage of time from day to night. And you don't see that necessarily in this piece, but you know, the printers were just adding colors to the press and printing hundreds of sheets of paper for Matt. And then he would take those sheets back to his studio, and he had an architectural plotter with a knife on it. And he is a, what do you call the paper? He's not origami necessarily. He's a paper sculptor. I can't quite remember the word for that. The guys that make like pop-up cards, his first job was making pop-up cards, right? I can't quite come up with the terminology, sorry. So he works a lot with the sciences. So he is a person that naturally has this in his head about how paper folds and how space works. And so he works with a lot of scientists to actually create in physical form what scientists are trying to predict on paper. And they'll talk to each other, and he'll be like, oh, so you mean it's like this? And he'll fold something up and come up with this form that perfectly represents these cells that they're talking about. And they look at it like, you're amazing. How did you come up with that? So you set Matt loose in a studio, and he just starts folding things and coming up with these shapes. And so we printed these blends on all these different sheets of paper, and we sent them home with Matt, and we get back things like this. And this is 6 different prints that I like put together for an animation, but there's 6 different prints that are shifting and moving, and this is how our artists are thinking now.
Is he the same artist who you put the next slide on that did these pieces?
Yeah, that's also Matt. So we have this piece right here. It's a little deceptive. This is in our front window at Tamarind. It's about, I'd say, 8 feet by 16 feet. So lots of paper went into this, and it moves and it shifts, and part of this is just how Matt thinks. So really, we're working with the artists that are coming to us and inventing things, figuring things out for how they're thinking about their art.
Really awesome. Thank you, Brandon. Would anyone else like to add to that before I move forward? We got one more. All right. No? Okay. Next question, guys. What are some of the challenges and benefits that new technologies have brought or will soon be coming to your printmaking practice?
Hello. So, digital printing. You just coined an awesome term. What was it over there?
Tradigital.
Tradigital.
I didn't invent that though. That's been around.
That's been around?
Yeah.
Okay. First time I've heard it. So the studio I run was founded by my late uncle, Richard Duardo. His Modern Multiples has been a big proponent in the art world. Obviously, Gemini, Gel, and Sirius, and El Nopal Press, and all of these, Tamarind, incredible on the national and even still the LA scale. Richard was always sort of the East Side, East LA, Northeast LA printmaker, and always going a little rogue with it. And so my body of knowledge in the printmaking world very much comes from forensically going through decades of artwork and different styles and different projects, different techniques in the medium. And I giggled as well when we were all standing here before, saying we're all working in these traditional fields talking about the digital realm of it, or the new groundbreaking technological realm. I would say, Manny, you're probably the farthest ahead with that, with all the CNCs, the laser cutters, and all of this, which is really incredible. I like the idea of somehow finding a way to include all of them, like what you were talking about, Brandon, where it is the artist that helps drive it, and the benefits that come out of it is that you do get to start layering not only layers in a screen print, not only layers in a lithograph, but layering the mediums on top of each other, where screen printing can actually use an element of etching or an element of die cutting, or I brought some examples that have screen printing and letterpress registered together all in the same paper. But with Modern Multiples, where we are now and what we're doing, the way that the technology comes in the most is the Epson printer, is the digital printer. When it comes to printing films, when it comes to printing giclées, archival digital prints, that's the biggest use that we get out of it. And currently we're mostly contract printing. And so what I've found with a lot of the artists that we have worked with in the last several years is that it makes sense. People want these phenomenal millions of colors, incredible painter-esque limited editions. However, nobody has the capability to put through, say, for example, a Frank Romero 45 color or Carlos Almaraz 45 color screen print these days that you take 2 months to make.
Those are some beautiful
3 months to make, right? And so I have those in my mind from the studio. I wasn't part of the productions. However, you come in and you have these artists who really want to use a lot. What we found ourselves doing is, and I think we've had this conversation, I know, Francesco, I know I've had it with some art appraisers, is the digital print market, the fine art print market vocabulary, in my mind, is getting diluted by giclées in general, and gallerists who say, fine art print, 24 by 36, $125. And here we are as craftsmen, well, or working with craftsmen, putting days, weeks, months of work into printmaking, traditional printmaking techniques, and people don't actually, the art and commerce of it all, there's a disconnect now with what a fine art print is and what we as printmakers do on a daily basis.
Which makes me glad that you brought what you brought today.
So unfortunately, if you can't beat them, join them. But what I've found, if you will, a loophole, is with these digital prints is why not have all of it? Why not incorporate it? And the big argument from the appraising side or the commerce side of it is you could reproduce a reproduction very, very easily. You need the same file and a printer. There's a little bit of color correcting. Don't get me wrong, digital prints, archival giclées have merit. The entire Chichmerin Chicano collections of 30-some artists is all digital prints. However, what we've been doing is screen printing on our digital prints, turning it into something where you actually do add a layer or 2 or 10 to an artwork that might be too painterly to try and reproduce using a particular medium. And so I've been having a lot of fun as director of the studio with the artists who come in to sort of say, well, what do we want to change or expand on in that particular painting you want an addition from, and what can we add to it with a screen printing medium that you couldn't do any other way? I've got a lot of examples. I don't know if now's the right time to bring them up, but
Let's at the
probably
end
wait,
of the.
wait for it a little bit.
I think at the end of the panel, it'd be great. We don't.
And then if you
You don't
guys
even
wanna
need a
come
mic.
up.
You guys can come and check out.
Exactly.
Montana brought some really great prints that show what that actually looks like. All of us have seen G Clays before. What he's talking about is much different, where it's this combination and interaction between digital and screen printing coming together to make the artwork happen. So. Yeah, I will definitely, I'll make an announcement and check that out so you guys can see in person what he's talking about.
And the last note I'll make on it, because the question was advantages and disadvantages. Printmaking has a very human feel to it. It's one of the things I keep saying about serigraphy. It's going the way of vinyls. It's not going to die, but it's still smaller industry than it once was. However, it's got that human feel. You get it in real life. It's not as easy to digest over a computer screen or Instagram, but when you're holding it in life, the difference between a craftsman, a traditional printmaking technique print versus a digital print is huge. And we're starting to change that, or we're trying to change that a little by putting the artist's hand back into the digital work. So it's something that doesn't take quite as much craftsmanship to create. However, you get it, you see it, and you can absolutely see and feel that somebody, the artist or the printmaking team, has had an organic hand in the work. So that's sort of our biggest advantage.
I wanted you to talk about this piece a little bit,
Sure.
and this collaboration you had. So, can you elaborate?
Sure, absolutely. This was an artist who came in, Jerry Redding, and we ended up shepherding him all the way through to Art Basel, Miami, this past December, doing about 30 small and 3 large of the little edition that I have here. But his entire thing is false negative art. He overcame Lyme disease and switched all of his negative energy basically into the positive and the secret. But in the printmaking process, what that meant for us is he wanted ink on the entire paper except for a negative space word right in the middle. And that negative space word of pure paper, he wanted then blind embossed or blind debossed with letterpressing. And so I worked with Carrie Ocon over at Aardvark Letterpress. And in order to create a screen print separate, I'll blast through the process really quick just because that's the interesting part. In order to make a screen print that registers with the letterpress machine, which is even old worlder technology than anything we're using, well, not really.
Yes and no.
Yes and no. I had to start with the letterpress. And so I actually went and got every single word that was going to be the negative space in the middle of the artwork, created as a lead slug, pressed as a sample, scanned in, and then used to create the screen print separations digitally. And so I actually had the finished product of the letterpress already engineered into the separation of the screen print, and we used the same exact slug to register larger than their letterpress paper registers. We were hanging off the end of the machine in all directions. But we were able to register that one debossed word over an entire edition, dead center of a piece of paper. So that was a very
cool.
satisfying collab with letterpress and screen printing.
I think the troubleshooting, right, to figuring out how to make things work, that's part of being the master printer, finding a way to make it happen. So I want to extend out to Francesco, see if you have anything to add to that, Francesco, or also Manny.
Well, yeah, I have a lot to add, but I think that most of the subject, I think it was covered, which I think is that the technology is sort of like a technology available sort of is presented to the printmaker, and the printmaker starts sort of like accommodating that if possible. But I think there is a maxim, I always think about that the maxim is it goes something like, what process to use to best maximize the look of the project or the project of the printmaker. And I think that some print shops have the ability to have quite a few processes at the disposal of the artist. And some other print shops have, they mostly specialize on some specific processes, but a lot of that has to do with a much larger umbrella, which is the cost of production, the business itself, which I think is absolutely crucial to even answer some of these questions, because I think that there is also a kind of a hierarchy in terms of the process of printmaking that somehow leashes out to museums, to collectors, etc., in terms of collectability, and all of those things sort of like influence the print shops, etc. You know, I think also provenance of where the print is being done, and again, the technique used on the print. All of those things are super important, you know. But I think that one thing that is that I agree with all of my. By the way, thank you very much for inviting me, and
Very
thank
glad
you
to
very
have you
much
here.
for accepting me here. And so, I mean, the only thing that that's interesting. I mean, maybe some of these prints that show maybe some sort of innovation in the print shop. For example, this print is done by it's a print by Anita Bunn. I cannot really. I don't know if you can see them very
It's a little hard
clearly
to see.
here.
It's because the lights. I think if we had.
So anyway, this is a print done with one film, a continuous stone film that I developed years ago. That I've been sort of like wondering whether I should patent it or not, you know. And I've been sort of like playing for. But it's a continuous film.
Thank you. Thank you.
From a digital file. So digital files, as was mentioned by most of my colleagues here, are some of the definite presence in technology, as opposed to the the dark room creation of film, etc.
Can you
So
go
this-
back a little bit on that? The process of this,
This
what
is,
type of?
this is a lithograph, but it's a continuous stone photolithograph, which means there's no halftone whatsoever. So that the tonalities on the plate shifts according to the amount of emulsion on the plate. So so this is something that was developed in an El Nopal press, for example, and there are other examples like that. This one right here was a very early on print, and it's not very good there on the screen, but it's a early first John Baldessari print that I collaborated with him, and I think he was addressing the issue of the border on this one. There's actually a secondary print that is like
Let me try another.
but anyway, that particular print is like 3 layers of details done with this continuous stone process, and they're translucent, so the image is formed by the layering of the different details. There's the support paper, and there's I think there's some tissue paper and some Tengusho paper, some Japanese papers that were printed. So this is actually, this is John Valadez. This is also done with the process of this continuous stone film. Is white on black paper, and you can, negative film turns into positive and vice versa on the other side. This print in the center really sort of raises a question on the thing of the hierarchy. I actually had a good conversation right now with Garrett regarding, for example, I kind of am involved working with a proofing press, a Mylander proofing press. And the Mylander proofing press has incredible capabilities. But one of the parentheses behind the proofing press, I think maybe some of you would agree or not, because it's a offset press. It kind of like has this sort of like denigration of some sort, because it goes into the commercial printmaking, even though offset presses, especially the proofing press, Mylander presses, they started being used like 30 years ago, and they have sort of like, they really got into the fine art, in the fine art world, I think Tyler Graff has had one, and et cetera. So he has a kind of a already a certain amount of authority, but nevertheless, I think that I cannot by emphasize that the hierarchy of processes is really in the back in terms of recognition, authority, etc., makes a big kind of a mark that influences the market, etc. Just one other, this is printed on glass right here. It's printed on glass. The last one is developed this ink with graphite. Powder graphite used for lubrication. We made some lithographic ink. And in this case, this is Ruben Ortiz Torres. He did a performance in it's called the 4th of July barbecue flag. He put some flags into a barbecue during 4th of July. The ashes from the flags, we turned them into ink, and we printed the flag there.
That sounds so
maybe
interesting.
So anyways,
I think that sounds great. I also think that Francesco, talking about the market and how print shops are driven by what popularity and demand bring in, this hierarchy, it really brings me to question like the awesomeness of like Manny's work here. Now, not necessarily worldwide known, but a smaller community shop that you can get technology to work for you, and this is a place that's interdisciplinary. You can come in and work, and Manny's been able to establish this in Highland Park. So that segues me to the next question. What would you dream and imagine for printmaking and future possibilities in printmaking? So if you can, Neri, let's go to Manny Torres' photos. And Manny, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your space, a community interdisciplinary space dealing with laser technology. And you kind of serve as an alternative to what Francesco was just describing. So if you can elaborate a little bit on that, and at the same time talk to us more about your practice.
Hi everybody, Manny Torres. I run a studio called Second Wind, an interdisciplinary design studio. I call it interdisciplinary because it involves different disciplines in one project. It could be a combination of woodworking and graphic design, and along with some laser cutting involved. So the way that my studio primarily works is, I run custom work. I do custom work primarily. A lot of times it's just kind of random projects, but sometimes I do get approached, and these are kind of like my favorite type of projects, is working with artists. A lot of artists are familiar with laser cutting technology, but I'm not too sure how it works. It is a computer-based process, so having a little bit of knowledge of setting up files and all that is always something that I get questions about. And
how'd you get into this?
well, my background's in architecture. That's what I studied, and I worked for 10 years. During the economy crash, I was laid off, and so I was unemployed for a year. Being in architecture, I was familiar with processes like CNC cutting and laser cutting, CNC milling and laser cutting, and so I saw a potential to kind of run my own studio based on this, but not so much doing kind of random projects. I was more interested in working with artists, and as well me learning about this process and how can I grow as an artist. I also on the side, I'm a jewelry maker, and I also do my own artwork. But the way that my studio kind of has been run over the past years, like 80% of what I do is really custom, working with artists and architects and designers. And so a lot of times artists have an idea of kind of what they want to do, and then they come to me and I facilitate the process. Sometimes artists know they want to work with paper, and so they will kind of establish that. The laser cutter can work with a lot of materials, which opens up my what can I say, my practice to different disciplines. I've worked with graffiti artists who are essentially stencil-based artists, and we do a lot of stencils. The project on the left is a piece that was done by Daniel Gonzalez, and essentially everything that you see in white has been laser cut. So he came to me and he told me, is it possible to do a print? And I know exactly the areas that I want to cut out. Is it possible to stick this print in the laser cutter and cut out, kind of like in the papel picado traditional style, but using the laser cutter to do things that a knife probably have a hard time doing, like the circles and the points and all that. And so I told him, yeah, it's possible. I've never done anything like this, but it could be done. The key thing was to make sure that the print was registered almost in the exact location, because essentially I'll run one setup process, and hoping that the print maybe can be offset, maybe like a 30 seconds of an inch off. I can still work with something like that. I told Daniel, make sure you don't have any cut lines butted up right up against any print, because they might get cut off. You know, so we ran like 3 or 4 tests, and we realized that way it works. So, so we did a series. Can't remember what the series was. No. You know, I have the setting controls on the laser, which adjust based on material. If I'm cutting paper, I know that I have to reduce the power setting and increase the speed. If I'm cutting through wood, then you do the opposite. You slow down the laser and you bump up the power. And so you just got to make sure that nothing like that happens. So yeah, this one ended up working, and I can't remember the thickness of the paper, but I was able to run like 6 on top of each other, and I was able to cut 6 at a time. So that kind of helps reduce the cost on the project, and which I'm totally able to do and work with pulp and doing stuff like this. So I think this ends up being like 20 by 36 or something like that. So it's pretty big. My laser cutter is 45 by 33, so it's pretty big, and then I'm able to, put in big sheets in there and do stuff like that. The project on the right is working with an LA artist, Coffee. Artist goes by Coffee. He does a lot of. He's also a draftsman, a background in architecture. A lot of his processes and graphics are based on traditional kind of layering of using grids. He collects a lot of old drafting supplies, and so his prints end up being his originals end up being a collage of different mediums, like overlays of things that he's found in books, along with just acrylic painting. And so he collects these clipboards. He has a huge collection of these clipboards. For the last show he did, he wanted to incorporate some of his collages into these clipboards. This one actually was a double width clipboard that he ended up cutting to make it. I don't think clipboards come this size. So he ended up customizing his own, and he made a handful of these. So basically, we took his digital scan and converted it into a bitmap. And the bitmap, and then he pre-painted each panel. Each panel is slightly painted different. So even if you have 5 of these, no 2 will look alike, because of the way that he paints them, they're slightly different. And then I think he goes back. This was what it came out of my studio. After he, received them, he did a numerous layers of embellishment, which ends up looking a little bit different than this. But this is just laser etching into, I believe it's like tempered hardboard clipboards, just standard clipboards. And everything you see kind of like as a black has been etched out, which is like in this case, it burns through the paint, and you're seeing, the tempered hardboard burn, right? And again, we also did like 3 or 4 different tests. I showed him different depth studies, and what he selected was similar to what this is. And so, I ended up doing like a handful of series of these, but I think this one was my favorite from the series that we ran. This is another LA artist who goes by I1, and he, I don't know if you've seen I1's work. He does a lot of the Zapatista character all over like Silver Lake, but he also has all the other side of his kind of creative outlet is that he does a lot of photography, and he converts photography into bitmap images. And so this is a series of these 2 panels. I think each one is 20 by 20, and his material of preference is using particle board, like from Home Depot. And his thing is that he also pre-paints panels, but this is after he left the studio. Everything you see in color, he went back and added. So basically what I've done is laser etch the bitmap image. A lot of the text that you see on there could be from the plywood. A lot of when it, yeah, exactly. So he keeps a lot of that kind of stuff. And again, like, you know, if we did 4 of these, probably no 2 would look alike, because it depends on the artist, how he paints the panel, and also even within a sheet of plywood, if you etch the top part of it at a certain setting, you might get a different result, you know, at the bottom portion of the panel. It just really depends on the material itself, which is why I like working with wood a lot, because wood, you know, working with birch plywood, you can work with oak, you know, they all render different results. Plexiglass, exactly. And so, you know, for his show, he did like about 30 photographs that we converted. He did all the file work himself. Like, he knows exactly what he wants. He had an idea of what it would look like on this type of wood. And again, we ran a couple of tests, and he really dug the results, so he just went with it. And we did like, I believe like 30 of these prints. And so this is, you know, working with particle wood.
So now this makes me really curious, like, especially because you're working at the level you're working. How do you see some of the newest technologies impacting what you do?
Well, I think, you know,
What's new that's happening that you really feel a need to want to address in your studio or bring in?
There's stronger, there's bigger machines, there's stronger machines. I'm limited to what I can cut and etch on my machine. I've seen laser cutters that now have dual heads, so you can run like a job like twice the speed. You know, more powerful, so you can pre-cut panels, make custom. You know, these are just panels that you cut on the table saw. But say, for instance, if you wanted a certain shape, you know, that now with a stronger machine, you have the ability to cut it. You know, you're not limited to a square or a circle. Now you can pre-cut a panel into pretty much any shape you want. There's also CNC machines. CNC machines.
3D, like CNC machines that will actually carve in circular motions,
Yes.
and it could create lines that weren't typically possible. Where previously a plank is on a table and it digs into whatever substrate is on the table, versus molding and cutting in a 3-dimensional form right into the surface. That's probably the biggest new fancy CNC.
Right. So my machine is a 2-axis laser, which works primarily in X and Y directions. What you're talking about is like a 5-axis.
Yeah.
5-axis, where it's actually
Wow.
it's an arm. It's like a mechanical arm that can actually cut and laser etch onto surfaces that are not flat. And those machines are like ridiculously.
There's a
Expensive.
neighbor of ours we're by the Brewery Art Lofts. Right between the Brewery Art Lofts and Modern Multiples, Big Art Labs. If anyone's ever heard of or gets an opportunity to tour them, they've got some pretty Big Art Labs. Could anybody not hear me with just my voice? I typically have a loud one.
Going back and forth.
But yeah, Big Art Labs has some. I got to walk through there. Some of the hugest. They're laser cutting sides of walls and and you know, making massive sculptures that would stand in front of the you know, like a hotel or something in Beverly Hills.
Yeah.
Golden Jaguars that are reduced out of blocks of gold. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, 5-axis. There's 5-axis laser cutters, 5-axis CNC machines. You can actually sculpt 3D objects now with the help of a 3D file. With this mechanical arm, will go in every area where a traditional laser cutter can't. I don't know if they have the Sonia Romero project.
You know, I didn't. I should have grabbed that and put it in here. But it wasn't that long ago, so I think a lot of people might have that still in their brains. It's a Sonia Romero print. It's a relief cut on the bottom, right? And there's a butterfly on top. It was the commemorative print for Day of the Dead a few years back. And there's a huge butterfly that's 3-dimensionally cut that's installed on top of the print. It's orange and black tone. Maybe I see some heads shaking. You've seen the print before. But that print is a collaboration also with you, a 3D printed piece on top of a print on wood, right? With hand rubbing on top. That's a really awesome piece.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think some of that new technology, I've only seen a little bit, and I think that harkens back to what Francesco was saying, is access and like money and shop budget. What we are allowed to work with or have access to work with becomes really limited. So we know these technologies exist, but our interactions with them start to become limited to where we are, where we are and who we have access to. And so Manny here is a local, and he provides the local services that we can get without having to go that higher up in accessibility. So I really appreciate that for what you offer here in Los Angeles, and that has been really, really key. So in talking about this awesome 5-axis CDNC router and how we all wish we could probably use it. Right, yeah. I think it also makes me really think of, Brandon, you were talking about VR for a little bit and how that is now starting to also interact with 2-dimensional artwork and 3-dimensional fake space of VR. Desert X comes to mind definitely with all of their VR installations and seeing print. Who's really, I want to know about who you guys have been interacting with that are maybe using some of these new technologies. And Brandon, you alluded to that a little bit when you spoke. So can you go any further on that? Some new artists that you are working with or have heard of or colleagues have worked with?
Sure. I think. Yeah, so some of the ones that I already showed, Luc Dubois and Matt Schlein are two that have come in recently. We have kind of a long list of people that have been going down this road, and a long list of people that will be going down this road, and a long list of people that maybe are using the current technologies that we have in new ways, which I think is also a discussion worth having. That, you know, we don't always need maybe the 5-axis printer, we just need to like reinvent the way we think about our current technologies. Yeah, like Garrett and the paint stick, and our artists are constantly reinventing for us and what they ask of us. So some other examples of that, like even on the student side of the shop, I think in one of the other slides I had the CNC machine, on the right side here. And this was kind of a stupid thing. It's like a crown holder for litho just clamped onto a CNC machine, right? Like there's nothing high tech about this here. Might as well have just duct taped it at this point. But we built this crown holder that was spring loaded so the CNC machine could handle it. But the way the artist was thinking in this, Amir Bakshi, he's an architect, and so he built a program that would map out the interior space of a room, drawing these circles. And so utilizing his program, we had to invent a way to work with that. And so rethinking the way that we're using our materials is constant for us. So even on the student side of the shop, where we're working with graduate students from the University of New Mexico, we're constantly as printers forced to interact with these new ideas and new materials and new technologies, even if it means clamping a crown holder to a CNC machine to get to draw, or putting a pen in a laser cutter. I forgot, was that you, Manny, or was that Garrett? That was you. And I think that's what's asked of us as printmakers. So, I mean, everyone coming into our shop is kind of doing this. We just had Aaron Noble in from LA. I say just, I think that was at least a year ago, but whatever. And, having him come in and do his graffiti style artwork and want to reproduce it like it's a Toulouse-Lautrec makes us think again about how we're using separation colors and creating those artworks and combining those colors together to make something that looks the way that we need it to. So we have a long list. Do you really want names?
Just a few key. I think it'd be interesting, especially since
okay.
You've already given us a few.
My weakness. Oti Pieski, we just had in from Finland, who is using the Epson printer in combination with lithography. Tara Donovan, who came in, and not necessarily like fancy high-tech processes. She was stacking cards, and then we were using some technologies to take those images and reproduce them, translate them into lithography. I'll just leave it at that. You can ask me later when I remember names.
That's great, thank you. Awesome. So, do you guys have any artists that you would also like to talk about or share that you've worked with, or are willing?
We're starting a collaboration with Thomas Demand. He's a photographer. He uses a lot of laser cutters and I want to say plotters for cutting out his paper construction that he photographs. Not really sure what we're going to do with him yet, but he mentioned wanting some kind of embossment prints of some sort.
That sounds really fun. See how that works out, huh?
Yeah.
All right, so the last question that I have is mostly just looking at the future and thinking about imagination and talking about how artists are leading this imagination. As printers now, how do you envision growth happening from here? What would be a dream? So this is more fantastical, and I'm kind of just reaching and thinking about where we would see things going now in the near future or very much in the future. Francesco.
Well, I mean, I think that one thing that comes to mind to me, I mean, the coming back to the idea of hierarchy, I think that, I mean, the worst case scenario that I know of in history is that people were looking at prints, but they were looking at the technique, right? At the top of the list of classical printmaking would be engraving, etching, wood engraving, which still is at the top of the list. And I think that those are considerations of the institution sometimes is looking at things, and I have many examples, which I won't get into in terms of visiting museums. But I think that what that indicates mostly is that it also has a lot to do with the market and the conversation with imagery, is that we don't really talk about imagery, the metaphors of imagery, in a current conversation in the art world. Said that it is really goes to, and of course I'm not necessarily, I cannot throw any stones whatsoever, but I think one consideration is that a lot of the conversation in the art world it goes as to the amount of money that things are selling, for example, as opposed to discussing the imagery and the contribution that the imagery has in a kind of a dialogue inside the art world. So that would be a kind of a wish that I have, and that that there would be more publishing houses. You know, publishing, I think that in its most maybe highest form, I don't know, would be that somehow or another you're actually printing artworks or printing imagery that sort of like has a narrative as to, you know, either deconstructing or revising history or what should be looked at, you know. But I think primarily the conversation of talking about imagery as opposed to just technique, for example, that would be a wish that I would have in the future.
Maybe this is my experience, but I'm also thinking particularly within the printmaking world, this becomes so much more evident because it is very much based in a process and in creating. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Just thinking in terms of what I want in my shop, I don't want a laser cutter, but I want access to the people like Manny that know how to run these things. Because I only have so much room and so much money in my shop, right? And I only have so much time and so much space in my head, basically. And litho takes up most of that space. And I mean, we have a little, I think it's a cute cry cut, like plotter cutter that's 12 inches wide and we use every once in a while. That's about my limit. But I wish that we had more access. And I'm part of a university that does have access to some of these materials and machines. Right, but the problem is the collaboration. People that are willing to use those machines in different ways is something that I'm still searching for. And someone that's willing to collaborate with me in the same way that I'm collaborating with an artist to create artwork instead of just technique. So I'm still looking for the people in my area that are willing to use their machinery, that have that machinery and know how to use it, have that know-how so that I don't have to have those skills, but are willing to collaborate with me in the same creative workspace that I'm trying to collaborate with my artist. And that's something that I think we're still working on, at least in Albuquerque.
All right, Montana?
Yeah, it's interesting. Just thinking about the sample of us up here. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Francesco, you're contract printing, correct? We're at the moment contract. You do. You're mostly publishing. Okay. So, but you know the contract printing world since Richard, since we've been running the studio, we've been primarily contract printing, and then Gemini Gel, Tamarind, very much publishing. You're inviting artists in. You have a program that runs that, and then Manny, you're a business, right? You're a small business owner. It's interesting to me how the facet of how we create, how we fabricate, how we print make, where our entrance is into the art world very much dictates the art we get to make. And so it makes me wonder, like you guys out there, you were mentioning a lot of university, or how many people are here for school purposes? Like you're in school, you're a student, and this is how it came up. Okay, how many of you guys are actually running a business or work at a business, and this is the printmaking you're doing? How many just enthusiasts? Like, cool. How many won't raise your hand no matter what I ask? Okay, awesome.
That brought the most hands up.
that literally did. No, I'm glad that so many of you guys who are enthusiastic about it have come out to hear us talk about basically what we do every day. The collaboration is huge. Is awesome. That's why
That's the great Malaquias Montoya, by the way, in the background there. It's an amazing master
this
printer
was
himself.
2017, the Print Summit. They came and toured Modern Multiples, so that's the Modern Multiples studio, and then we went immediately after to Mixografia, who would have been an interesting voice in this conversation too.
I was trying not to mention it, but I brought it up. Okay. They're too secretive. I was like, they won't tell us anything anyway.
Yeah. It's fun using technologies to blend the things. I was kind of hoping more practitioners out there, because I was going to ask, but maybe even up here, like, what is the collaboration between two printmaking forms that you want to do next? Do we want to stay in the niche of I make serigraphs, so we make serigraphs, you do laser cuttings and lithos, or is there an interest in what would it be like if it started as lithography and came over for some metallics and serigraph, or started in laser cutting and screen printed through it?
I feel like I'm already...
Please.
Okay, so in Los Angeles, I really feel like, particularly here in this area, what we got going on is so many artists, and all of them are frustrated that they're not getting representation, they're not getting their voices heard. So there's all these little pop-ups starting up, and this has been very, very much a part of recent art history for in LA. Creating our own spaces and bringing in different people to collaborate together. So I think that in my time here in Los Angeles, I'm seeing this happen now, where photography is grouping up with architecture and a printmaker, and they're all in the same space together. So I think it's going to start happening. Manny's facilitating a lot of this right now in Los Angeles in his way, and I'm seeing it a lot within small studio spaces where artists are getting together to create their own spaces of experimentation just through their own interests and working together. So as that stuff grows, I really feel like that's going to be on the forefront of how we see a lot of that change starting to happen. Yeah.